anybody could be slapped with the label of a privileged person, it would be this individual. He has everything, yet he's always complaining. Always. I had to hide away down there. I had to drink myself into oblivion with my friends. Where else could I go? Well, apparently he could go some places. I'll tell you one place he decided to go. He decided to go to a pub and meet an older woman, but we'll get there. Good morning. Welcome back to the channel. You guys, I thought things had gotten weird in this book. I thought it was weird from the get-go. I mean, it was weird from the get-go, that prologue. But, you know, so far it's I don't want to say it's been slow because it's been weird. He's been talking about a lot of weird things, but there's just been a lot of stuff where it's like, I don't remember. I think it went this way. Random stories that went nowhere. But now we're really getting into some meaty stories. And his choices are continuing to be terrible. And he continues to be like, why is everybody being so mean to me? I don't understand this. There's just so much offense taken in this chapter at everybody. That is what this whole section is. It's just, I'm offended. I'm offended. I'm offended. I'm offended. And it's like, well, why are you offended, Harry? Because someone noticed I was doing the wrong thing. Well, were you? Well, yeah, but they shouldn't have noticed. And so if you can take that level of annoyance, settle in, because here we go. Again, I want to thank everybody who's been commenting, really insightful comments. And if you haven't had a chance to glance through some of the comments on these videos, people are saying some things that are so true and thought-provoking, very thought-provoking. I'm going to have a segment at some point where I read some of the best comments because people continually are bringing things up and I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. That is a good point. So anyway, enjoy the comment section, comment if you've got something to say, because we all have something to say. That's why we're watching these videos. And of course, let me beseech you once again, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you haven't hit the bell for notifications, do that because you don't want to miss any of these videos. I am posting on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. And then between those, I'll cut up the episode and do it into clips because, you know, sometimes you just don't have 30 minutes. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, as much as you want to sit for 30 minutes to talk about Harry, we don't all have the time. And sometimes you want to send a video to a friend, but you're like, she won't watch it if I send her 30 minutes, but she might watch it if I send her this. So go ahead and enjoy the clips. And those come out every other day. So anyway, business is over. Let's get into it. All right. We start off with 9/11. He was almost 17 when 9/11 happened. And so he doesn't talk a lot about it yet, but obviously he's planting the seeds for his time in the military. I mean, he really didn't have that much to say about it. He just walked, he was at Eton at the time. He walked past the TV room and all the boys were in there watching the news. Usually they watched Family Guy. His favorite character was Stewie, not surprisingly. And he just watched it with them and was shocked and startled and horrified by what he was saying, just like the rest of us. And that's pretty much it. Just sort of giving us the setting of the world. This certainly had implications for his life. So moving on from that, it didn't say much there. Then he talks about still grappling about where is Mummy. We're on page 66. I cannot count for you the number of times we are back at this subject. I understand that he was trying to figure out a way to deal with his sadness. But it would be incredible if he could just move on from this. You guys, it has now been 4 years since the accident happened. A little over 4 years. And he's been telling himself this this whole time. And he goes into detail in this little section about how much he imagined her coming back and coming out of hiding. And, you know, he would replay this fantasy over and over and over to such an extent that even at night he was dreaming that she would, you know, come upon the scene and finally reveal where she'd been all this whole time. The thing that really surprised me in this little section was when he says that when he imagined it, not when he was dreaming, when he was wide awake and he's imagining, he says that surely she'd established herself by now, forged a new life, a new identity. Maybe at long last, she's going to emerge today holding a press conference and shock the world. After answering the shouted questions from the astonished reporters, she'd lean into the microphone. William, Harry, if you can hear me, come to me. You know, I don't have any patience for that for a number of reasons. One of them, it's like, why would It doesn't make sense, Harry. It doesn't make sense. Why in the world would your mother, who was hounded by the press, when she finally decides to come out of hiding, would hold a press conference when the whole reason she left was to run from the press? Okay, problem number one. Number two, what is wrong with your mother that you would imagine that when she comes back, the first thing she's going to do is run into the arms of the press, not to you? And then the third thing is to tell you to come to her? How about she comes to you? It's like, if this is your imagination of your mother, man, this is the best you can come up with. This, in your wildest imagination, in your wildest hopes and dreams, when she comes out, it'll be to meet the press, the very people she was running from. That doesn't make sense. Nothing you say makes sense. And then he talks about the fact that in his dreams, she'd always be in a disguise, a big blonde wig, big black sunglasses. Yet I always recognized her. Well, yeah, that's what she looked like. She had a lot of blonde hair and she often wore sunglasses. I should hope you would. Anyway, he talks on about the fact that, you know, in the depth of his heart, he probably realized that this was all just a lot of foolishness. But the illusion of Mummy hiding, preparing to return, was never so real that it could blot out reality entirely. But he says it blotted it out enough that he was able to postpone the bulk of his grief. Okay, so we're coming to a little bit more reality here. I think that is probably the most honest passage about this whole fantasy world that he's living in with the mummy. Because, of course, he couldn't have possibly believed that that was a true statement. Of course, he wasn't really waiting for her to come out of hiding. Although, I mean, again and again, he says that everything to him, his whole world was walking through life looking for a sign that she was trying to signal to him. I'm not mocking him. I'm for real, you guys. This is some mental illness, because he's talking about how he would have dreams at night, and then he says that he'd have a dream, and then right before he'd find out whether it was her or not, he'd wake up. And he says, only a dream, again. But then I'd tell myself, maybe that means today's the day. I was like those religious fanatics who believe the world will end on such and such a date, and when the date passes uneventfully, their faith remains undaunted. I must have misread the signs or the calendar. So he's writing about some extensive mental gymnastics that he's going through in order to continue to believe this lie, although at the same time saying, I don't think I really believed it, but I mean, it kept me going. So he tried to he would try to give himself stern talks about the fact she was dead, but his heart just didn't want to believe it, so he just kept on. And then we start getting into some youthful shenanigans, to put it nicely. He starts talking about the fact that, and this really bugged me. It just really got on my nerves. He starts talking about when he was eaten and the fact that he had several friends and they were, they were all about bringing to school some substances. And they were all about meeting in the bathroom and smoking the substances. And he said that it was like, one guy would be sitting on the toilet next to the window, breathing smoke out. And then the other group would be like sitting on the sink, sitting on the tub, everybody like waiting for their turn. And they would just like go around and around in a circle. Each person like getting up, taking their turn on the toilet, taking their turn, and like blowing smoke out the window. And then like next guy, until it was all gone. What a wonderful way to spend your Eton education. Which he even does comment. He's like, we talked about the fact that we were really wasting this great education, but like, what are you gonna do when you need it? And, he's like, we even made a pact that we wouldn't, but then the very next day, I was like in bed, and then I heard them all going to the bathroom for our rituals, and I was like, oh, you guys, come on. I thought we said we made a pact, but okay, if you're going to, me too, don't leave me out. So, again, it's like, Harry, okay, your pack of loser friends can go ahead and smoke themselves into oblivion. Why are you wasting all of your privilege? Why are you wasting this? I don't understand it. So he says that, one time when they were in the bathroom, altering their minds in reality, he had looked out of the window and he saw he was watching the police officers marching back and forth, and they were stationed there because of him. And he writes this, and I'm gonna tell you, I roll on this one. He goes, they were stationed out there because of me, but they didn't make me feel safe. They made me feel caged. Beyond them, however, that was where safety lay. All was peaceful and still out there, I thought. How beautiful, so much peace in the wider world, for some, for those free to search for it. Okay. So, The security made you feel real caged in. But when you couldn't get security for you and Megan, you're over there crying buckets of tears, being like, how could my father be so mean to us? How could he deny me my rights? I need security. You just told me you don't want security. You just told me they made you feel caged in. And now suddenly, but I have to have my rights. I have to have my security team. Well, I thought you were trying to go out into the world and search for peace. You can't have it both ways. Anyway, while he's staring outside, feeling sorry for himself about all the people out there trying to take care of him, he sees a fox. Oh no, a fox. What could this mean? Could this be a sign from Mummy? Just like that leopard back in Africa. And he says, and I mean, the guy must have been pretty, he must have been sucking on that, he must have been in that bathroom quite a while with his friends, is what I'm trying to get at. Because he says, maybe it was the weed. Undoubtedly it was the weed. But I felt a piercing and powerful kinship with that fox. I felt more connected to that fox than I did to the boys in the bathroom. The other boys had eaten, even the Windsors in the distant castle. In fact, this little fox, like the leopard in Botswana, seemed like a messenger sent to me from some other realm, or perhaps from the future. I felt a powerful kinship with the fox. I don't know why that cracks me up so much, but my goodness gracious. Okay, so then we talk about the fact that when he was at home, all he wanted to do was hide. He spent his entire life hiding. He was either in his room or he was in the nursery. He liked to play a lot of video games. He liked to play Halo. And it was just all about just trying to stay away from anyone who's going to bother him, ask him any questions, like, just leave me alone. He said that they liked to hide a lot in the basement at Highgrove, and he and Willie did. Now, it would appear that at Highgrove, Willie was willing to be his friend. It used to be a bomb shelter, and he goes on to describe this cozy little nook they had. You had to go way down in the basement, like there's tunnels and all this, and then he goes on and talks about that this little nook that they had fashioned from all sorts of cast-offs that they had found around the castle. Persian rugs, red Moroccan sofas, wooden tables, dartboard, stereo system, and that, you know, they kept it well stocked with alcohol, but not drugs. Okay, you guys, no one was doing any drugs. Okay, well, let's be honest with ourselves. Well, you're probably going to lose your friend first to alcohol before you're going to lose him to weed, but whatever. Anyway, no one was doing any drugs down there, so I just want to set the record straight, says Harry. And then he talks about the fact that they had a lot of friends that they used to bring back down with them, and, you know, lots of, he says, there was plenty of innocent snogging, which went hand in hand with the not-so-innocent drinking, rum and coke or vodka, usually in tumblers with liberal splashes of Red Bull. We were often tipsy and sometimes smashed, yet there wasn't a single time that anyone used or bought drugs down there. But like Harry, what's ultimately the difference? Alcohol is a drug. I mean, you can try to make some kind of difference there, but it's not. And then he said, our bodyguards were always nearby, which kept a lid on things. But it was more than that. We had a sense of boundaries. Oh yeah, what might they have been? What sacred boundaries were you holding so dear? Anyway, then he says that it was a perfect hideout for a teenager, especially this teenager. Boo-hoo, cry me a river, okay? The privilege is just dripping off every page. I mean, I use that word reluctantly because much has been made about one's privilege, but if anybody could be slapped with the label of a privileged person, it would be this individual. He has everything, yet he's always complaining. Always. I had to hide away down there. I had to drink myself into oblivion with my friends. Where else could I go? Well, apparently he could go some places. I'll tell you one place he decided to go. He decided to go to a pub and meet an older woman, but we'll get there. Then he says that sometimes when they'd be, one of the things he liked about the place was that whenever they were down in Club Harry, Willie actually wanted to be his friend. And he says, Willie felt the same about Club H. I often thought he seemed more at peace down there than anywhere else on earth. And it was a relief, I think, to be somewhere that he didn't feel the need to pretend I was a stranger. Quite frankly, who says that would be a relief? I'd love to pretend that guy was a stranger. If that guy was my brother, suddenly I can understand why Willie was like, back up, you know? I mean, can you imagine this ragtag all the time, barking at your heels, whining and crying about something? Although, he goes on to say that William often tried to talk to him about their mother down in these little quiet, cozy times as they're both nursing the bottle. And he says that he just didn't want to talk about it. And William would get frustrated with him. And Harry says that being so obtuse, so emotionally unavailable wasn't a choice I made. I simply wasn't capable. I wasn't close to ready. Well, yeah, it would be hard to talk about it since you've been living in a fantasy world low these many years. Then he says that, this was the other thing that I'm telling you, when I was reading this section, I could not stop rolling my eyes. I could have rolled my eyes right out of my head for how many times I rolled my eyes reading this. He talks about the fact that he goes, one topic that was always safe was how wonderful it felt to be unseen. We talked at length about the glory, the luxury of privacy, of spending an hour or two away from the press's prying eyes. Our one true haven, we said, where those lot could never find us. Okay, was the press roving across the heathered moors when you're on your long hunting trips? Explain to me how you don't have constantly the ability to be by yourself. You have a plethora of castles available to you. There's lodges scattered across Scotland that you go to. Wales. I mean, it's like England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Where does this boy, this boy could go anywhere he wanted to go. He wanted a little piece, he could get some. And here he is acting like this tortured individual. Oh, I'm sorry. So you're telling me that when you're stalking that red deer, the press was right behind you? Give me a break. All this whining and crying. Anyway, things started to get serious when Marco came to him and said, we need to have a chat. Oh no, Marco's calling him. What could this be about? And he says that he was a little bit nervous because just recently he lost his virginity to an older woman out back behind a pub. What? I mean, like we said in the last video, did we not see this coming? This guy's had an obsession with older women since we've met him. And of course it was going to be an older woman. But listen to this sordid description. He says that Marco calls him up and says, oh, mate, we got to meet. And he's panicking because he's like, oh no, somebody saw me. I suspected he was referring to my recent loss of virginity. Inglorious episode with an older woman. She liked horses quite a lot and treated me not unlike a young stallion. Quick ride, after which she'd smacked my rump and sent me off to graze. Among the many things about it that were wrong, it happened in a grassy field behind a busy pub. WTF to this? I mean, you're going to tell me that you, Prince Harry, could have had anybody and you chose to throw it away on an old lady back behind a pub and the grass? I mean, okay, this guy's already made a lot of poor decisions. This is the one that I was like, wow, we really are on the brink of just complete and total mental breakdown. This was how you wanted to do it? In the grass behind a busy pub with a strange old lady? I thought his mom dying was a tragedy. This feels like a bigger tragedy to me. What in the world was this decision? Anyway, so Marco comes to talk to him, but it's not about him rolling around in the grass with an old lady. What it comes down to is that he has been... There's somebody who's about to write a story about him. About his, wild partying and about how he is a big drug addict and how he is, people knew about Club H, how he'd bring his friends down there like all the time. He had it wasn't just like he and William hiding downstairs. It's like that was where his friends, he brought all his friends. So people knew about it. Anyway, he says that it seemed that the editor of Britain's biggest tabloid had recently phoned my father's office to say she uncovered evidence of my doing drugs in various occasions, including Club H, also a bike shed behind a pub. My father's office immediately dispatched Marco to take a clandestine meeting with one of the editor's lieutenants in some shady hotel room, and the lieutenant laid out the tabloid's case. Now Marco laid it out for me. Well, you were doing drugs, though. You were doing drugs. So why are you acting shocked like, how dare somebody call me out on my drug use? Yeah, I'm using drugs, but so what? It's like, but you are using drugs. Like, you cannot be shocked that people are noticing that you're behaving in ways that are not traditionally the way one would expect a prince to behave. Okay? No one's writing stories about William doing drugs because William's not doing drugs. Anyway, so he's super offended. I'm offended. Anyone would even notice. And so, but this was the part, already I'm shocked that he's indignant. How could you be indignant? They're writing about the truth. Conduct yourself decently and then no one will have anything to say. Imagine that concept. And he says that, he goes on to say, and truly, I'm marking my book. I write next to this passage, what the hell kind of passage is this? Because he goes to talk about the woman who, the editor of this story. And he says, that Marco lays the case before him. Wrong, wrong, wrong. The basic facts, the details, it was all wrong. I then questioned Marco. Who the hell is this editor? Loathsome toad, I gathered. Everyone who knew her was in full agreement that she was an infected pustule on the arse of humanity, plus a shit excuse for a journalist. But none of that mattered because she'd managed to wriggle her way into a position of great power, and lately she was focusing that power upon me. She was hunting spare, straight out, making no apologies about it. She wouldn't stop till my balls were nailed to her office wall. Could any passage be more dripping with adolescent immaturity? It's like, Harry, I understand the frustration of people saying things about you that are not 100% correct, but let's look at the details. Is any of it correct? Are you doing drugs? Are you behaving in ways that are irresponsible? Are you acting out in ways that are outlandish? I mean, you literally just finished telling me that you were out back behind a pub with an old lady, okay? Those aren't the kind of behaviors one would expect from a young prince. I mean, pardon my old-fashioned ideas about what a prince should look like, but it's not rolling around out back with an old lady. And then he says to Marco, you know, this is just basic teenage stuff, Marco. Why am I getting in trouble for this? And Marco's like, look, it's going to get published, so, you know, we've got to deal with this. You're saying that you're not doing drugs? Harry's like, no. Me? Why would anybody think that? I mean, I've only been a beacon of fantastic moral decisions my entire life. How could anybody think that I would ever be up to anything that wasn't great? And so then we get to a section in the story where I'm just like, could my mind be blown anymore? He says that Marco goes back to Pa, tells Pa what happened. They reach out to the editor and they're like, they tell the editor, no, this is true. The editor's like, it is true, and I'm going to run the story anyway. And Harry's like, yeah, but Pa's going to stop her, right? Because, like, she can't do that. That's crazy. And Marco's like, well, actually, it is going to happen because Pa's not going to stop it. And we come to, like, this enormous accusation. Like, I'm talking an enormous accusation from Harry. He says, he's like, he can't figure out, like, why won't Pa do something about this? They're telling lies about me. They're not telling the truth. Why won't somebody do something about this? Why won't Pa stand up for me? Why doesn't anybody care about the spare? And he says, did Marco tell me why? Or did I learn only later that the guiding force behind this putrid strategy was the same spin doctor Pa and Camilla had recently hired? The same spin doctor who'd leaked the details of our private summits with Camilla. This spin doctor, Marco said, had decided that the best approach to the case would be to spin me right under the bus. In one swoop, this would appease the editor and also bolster the sagging reputation of Pa. Amid all this unpleasantness, all this extortion and gamemanship, the spin doctor had discovered one silver lining, one shiny consolation prize for Pa. No more the unfaithful husband. Pa would now be presented to the world as the harried single dad, coping with a drug-addled child. This is what he says about his own father. That his dad, in a desperate attempt to regain his soiled reputation, was going to throw his child under the bus so that he could be like, it's not me, look at Harry. Harry's the one with the drug problem. I'm just the guy that's trying to soldier on. What parent would do that? That is so wild and crazy. That is just beyond the beyonds the beyond. But it's that crazy campaign spin doctor again. It's like, what wild world are you living in, Harry? What wild world are you living in? Maybe don't act in ways that anybody has to cover for your ass. What about that wild concept? Anyway, so he says that he went back to Eton, and because I shouldn't laugh at this person. This person is having problems. But I read this and I laughed just like when I laughed that he said the fox. He felt the closest to the fox. He says he goes back to Eton. He's trying to do his schoolwork, trying to remain calm. I mean, the whole world's melting down around him because that campaign spin doctor's over there throwing stories to the press. He said, I listened over and over to my go-to soothing CD. Sounds of Okavango. 40 tracks. Crickets. Baboons. Rainstorm, thunderbirds, lions, and hyenas scrapping over a kill. This is what he would fall asleep to? It was the only way I could sleep. But why? Is it a joke that he'd fall asleep to hyenas scrapping over a kill? Isn't that what he wants us to believe his whole life is? Anyway, just give me a break. I had to go to sleep to the sounds of Africa. It's the only way I could sleep at night. He tells us that the story comes out and he's devastated by all the lies that are coming out, and that his dad didn't even try to stand up for him. And he is embarrassed and he's shocked. And look, okay, full disclosure, like, I have a minuscule amount of pity for him in the sense that there probably was a lot of false, there was probably a lot of false color that was added to this story. For sure. I mean, I'm positive. It's a tabloid. Of course they were adding in all kinds of spicy details they thought would make the readers more interested in what they had to say. And that's terrible journalism. I agree with that. But the nub of the matter is this. Harry has acted in ways that made it easy to write a story about him. Pure and simple. Pure and simple. And it isn't because he was despair. It's because the heir wasn't acting in a way that was worthy of a story. Had William been acting in the same way, you better believe that the press would have jumped on that. What's more exciting? That's way more exciting. The future king of England is acting like a fool rather than his little brother who, you know, quite frankly, his whole life is just going to be one party after another. So what difference does it honestly make what he does? If Harry had acted above reproach, what could they have possibly said about him? But he wants to act foolishly and then he wants to be angry about it. Anyway, the story comes out. And he says that more than being embarrassed about it, he felt heartbroken at the idea that this had been partly the work of my own family. My own father, my future stepmother. They'd abetted this nonsense. And for what? To make their own lives a little bit easier? Yeah, apparently that's the people you come from. This horrible, rabid crowd of vicious and vindictive individuals who are just grabbing at your collar and throwing you down into the pits of hell at every turn of the way. Come on. He says he talked to Willie about it, and Willie's like, raw deal, Harold. And he says that sometimes William was even more angry about it than he was because he had been privy to some of the details that the campaign spin doctor had been doing in these backroom dealings, and William knew a little bit more about it, and, you know, he thought it was pretty shady and quite frankly, pretty bad. But again, is this the behavior of an arch nemesis? This person is on your side. This person is over here saying, yeah, this is really unfair. I'm sorry that they're doing this to you. I wish they hadn't, you know, and being angry for you and being on your side about it. Harry, get out of here with your business about my arch nemesis always was trying to drag me down. If this was your arch nemesis, then he would have been with Pa being like egging him on. Anyway, oh, you guys, again, I don't understand where the editor was. I don't understand why nobody stopped this man from so many passages. And this is like Exhibit A. When I come to you and say this book is terribly written and where was the editor? I mean, okay, sit down, okay? Because you're going to fall out if you're standing when you hear this. He says that he phoned Marco and he offered sympathy and he was sorry about him. And I asked him to remind me, what was the editor's name? He said it and I committed it to memory. Been the year since, I've avoided speaking it and I don't wish to repeat it here. Spare the reader, but also myself. Besides, can it possibly be a coincidence that the name of the woman who pretended I went to a rehab is a perfect anagram for rehabber kooks? Is the universe not saying something there? Who am I not to listen? That has just reached levels of lameness I did not believe he could ascend. So now throughout the book, he refers to this woman as rehabber kooks. Her real name is Rebecca Brooks. Is that not like so embarrassingly lame that he just said that? Just call the woman by her name. You just called her a pustule on the arse of humanity. Okay? God forbid you use the woman's real name. And it's like, to present it that way is just so immature. I do not even possess the vocabulary with which to describe how dumb that is. I don't understand. I don't understand. I have maxed out on my ability to understand this man. So, rehabber kooks. Oh, isn't that so clever that I figured out that anagram? Isn't that really funny that I call her rehabber kooks? About as funny as putting Tabasco in somebody's pudding, Harry. You really need a new sense of humor. He said life was just impossible after the story came out, and that it's all anybody could talk about, and it's all anybody wanted to it was just like all these newspapers were feeding off of that, and it was just this big feeding frenzy, and he was at the heart of it, and no one would give him a break. And even they had a family friend who came by, and he says, around this time, one of Pa's dearest friends came to Highgrove. She was with her husband, and the first thing the lady asked was, "Where's Club H?" I tried to show her around the gardens, tried to show her Pa's lavender. Did she care about that? No, all she wanted to know about was all my sordid life and all the details, and if they were true or not. And she asked to see Club H, and I took her down to the place where we used to hang out, and then she said that it smelled like weed. But it didn't smell like weed, it smelled like dirt. So I don't know what she was talking about. It was a real organic smell. And she was trying to tell you it smelled like weed. Well, so is weed. So is it possible that she also could smell that? No, it was the dirt she smelled. It was the dirt. And then he takes a wild turn in another direction. Okay, so he's done hounding the woman who wrote the story. Rehabber kooks, as he likes to call her. It's just, I'll never get over how lame that is. He says that his family is beginning to diminish. There had been a time everyone's getting married and having babies, but now everybody's of an age where has stopped and they're sort of at a static place. But now also people are dying. Grand's not doing well, and neither is Aunt Margot. And Aunt Margot, he decides to take us on a little detour about Aunt Margot. And he says, you know, she was my aunt, but I didn't ever really know that old hag. I mean, she had a real attitude problem. I understand the fact that her life was pretty terrible, and, you know, she had a lot of problems, and she had a marriage that was ridiculous, and, you know, she had been in love, and the pals had to thwart her, but I'm like, my God, that lady had a bad attitude. And it's like, well, birds of a feather flock together, my friend. Why didn't you find some kinship there? But he says that growing up, I felt nothing for her, except a bit of pity and a lot of jumpiness. She could kill a houseplant with a scowl. Mostly whenever she was around, I kept my distance. On those rarer than rare occasions when our paths crossed, when she deigned to take notice of me, to speak to me, I'd wonder if she had any opinion of me. It seemed she didn't. Or else, given her tone or coldness, the opinion wasn't much. Well, who would have much of an opinion of you? Then he begins to tell a story about a Christmas in which she had gifted him something. He says, I was standing before my pile. I chose to open the smallest present first. The tag said, from Aunt Margot. I looked over, calling out, thank you, Aunt Margot. I hope you like it, Harry. I tore off the paper. It was a biro. And I said, oh, a biro? Wow. And she said, yes, a biro. And I said, thanks so much. But it wasn't just any biro, she pointed out. It had a tiny rubber fish wrapped around it. I said, oh, a fish biro, okay. But I told myself, that is cold-blooded. What's cold-blooded is you even writing about it. You literally just told me you're standing in front of a pile of presents. Okay, so you didn't like one of them. All right. Did you buy Aunt Margot anything? I mean, it's just like, I mean, she probably did do it to snub him. But still, like, okay, I mean, the old lady was she was old, she was elderly, she'd had a hard life. You know, it's just like, you just move on. There not some younger family members you could be hanging around with? What do you got to pocket these bad memories for? For what? You know? And it's like, why are you telling us this story? Like, this does not make us be like, oh, I thought I liked Margaret, but now, after you told me the story about the fish pen, oh, well, that old lady was the worst. Who does he think is buying these stories that he's over here peddling? You know what this reminds me of? You know how everybody has that friend on Facebook who is always in a bad relationship and they're constantly posting about it, hoping to get everybody's sympathies on their side? And like, you're there and you're watching, but you are also thinking, like, why don't you shut up? That is how I feel about Harry. It's like he keeps throwing out these ridiculous stories to garner our sympathies, but all it makes me do is like, I'm here to watch it. I mean, this is a train wreck and I'm glad I'm not in it. But why are you telling us any of this? This not working. Like this trick that you're trying, it's not working. Anyway, so then he goes on to talk about the fact that really he and Aunt Margot should have been friends. What I was thinking exactly. And he says that they had so much in common. 2 spares. Her relationship with Granny was an exact analog of mine with Willie, but pretty close. The simmering rivalry, the intense competition, driven larger by the older sibling. It all looked familiar. Okay, why would William be in competition with Harry? I mean, technically he's already won. He's got the crown. Like, you think that William's in competition with you? What fantasy world are you living in? Oh yeah, the one where Mommy's coming back. But the fact that I mean, you're trying to tell me that the Queen was in a competition with her younger sister, and for what? I don't think that Queen Elizabeth ever for one moment was like, how can I outshine Margot? She's already outshining Margot. She's wearing the crown. Anyway, so then he goes on to talk about the fact that Margot did not make it. She burned her feet in a bath, and then she declined quite swiftly. And then Gran died. And somebody called him, some courier called him and told him the news. And then, of course, they had to go to another funeral. And of course, that reminded him of Mummy. And it's like, all right, already. But these people in your life are very elderly. You had to have known that you'd be at a couple more funerals before the end of time. And we're going to end it with this last little story. It is the Golden Jubilee. They're planning for it. The entire country is just swept up in the fun and the jubilation of a celebration. And they can't wait for the final day, and everything is decked out and draped out in the Union Jack. And it's just this really exciting and thrilling time. But trouble has come knocking once again in the form of drug accusations. And again, it's like, Harry, I'm going to tell you this for the last time. If you don't want people to say that you're doing drugs, don't do drugs. He says that somebody is now coming to him. Marco's come to him again and said, all right, we got more problems. This time they're saying you're using cocaine. Harry's like, dang it, I'm not using cocaine. How dare you people keep saying I'm using cocaine and drugs and all this kind of stuff. Where does outlandish, ridiculous nonsense come from? How dare they? Of course, I had been doing cocaine around this time. It's like, what is wrong with this guy? I mean, a whole page of complete and total indignation. How dare they? Except I was doing it. It's maddening. It's maddening. It's maddening to me that he can actually write about how frustrated this makes him. He says that Marco told him, look, there's a journalist who knows about this. Is it true? And Harry's like, I mean, like, they don't have like a picture of me or anything. It's like, I don't do that kind of stuff, okay? I don't do that kind of stuff. And Marco's like, all right, well, but this guy says that he won't run the story, but if you'll meet with him, because he wants to like have a little chat with you about like, that's not the way to do your, like, run your life. Harry's like, I can't meet with him because if I meet with him, that's like admitting that I did it, and I didn't do it. So just tell him I'm not a drug addict. And so the guy's like, Marco says, okay, well, I'll go back and tell him. And the editor decides to retract the story. But then we've got this little bit of foreshadowing. He says, on the bright side, I played the game well. After I'd called the journalist's bluff, he went silent. As suspected, he had no photo. And when his con game didn't work, he slithered off. Or not quite. He slithered into Clarence's house and became very good friends with Camilla and Pa. So we can only imagine we'll be hearing from this guy, about this guy later on. And I've seen this journalist actually speak many times on various interviews. He seems quite pleasant. I have no idea where in the world Harry comes off talking like this about anybody. But we'll end there because, I mean, this video is already pretty long. But can you, I mean, is anybody as flabbergasted as I am at his continual shock that there are people out there who are noticing that he's not behaving appropriately? He's so mad about it. And all I can say is, well, son, don't do things that make people raise an eyebrow at you. This is not the first time either. I mean, in the book, he's mentioned multiple times, like, about drinking until he's passing out. And he's doing drugs, and he's, you know, sleeping around. And it's, I mean, it's not like a little weed and, you know, he had a sip, you know, and he had a martini with his gran. It's like cocaine and doing stuff outside behind a pub. It's like, this isn't the way you behave. And you're not even 20 years old yet. And you're just wasting so much of the privilege that you have. This entire book has been safaris and ski trips and hunting trips. incredible education that has been offered to him, and beautiful homes, and anything he could ever want, and enormous amounts of freedom. I know he says that he's all the time locked up, but he has an enormous amount of freedom, and yet he's constantly complaining. I just didn't know it was possible for somebody to be this ungrateful. I cannot conceive of it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed talking about this. We are getting into some nitty gritty. Next time, we're going to get into the Jubilee. We're going to find out more about what comes of his drug use and more about what is being written about him. But we are going to talk about that on Thursday. So make sure you hit the bell for notifications so that you don't miss the next segment on Thursday. See you then. Bye.